57 years since the Civil Rights Act passed, but debates about race are as fiery as ever in America. And they've been kicked into overdrive by the New York Times' 1619 Project and the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. The hottest issue seems to be what our children are being taught about race and the history of racism in schools. This issue, which became described as critical race theory, played a role in Democrat Terry McAuliffe losing his bid for governor of Virginia. Will it thwart other Democrats' political ambitions? Joining me now are Noah Feldman and Randall Kennedy, both professors at Harvard Law School. Feldman is the author of a new book, The Broken Constitution: Lincoln's Slavery and the Refounding of America. And Kennedy's latest is Say It Loud: On Race, Law, History, and Culture. Noah, let me start with you by asking, what is it about this conversation about race that triggered what appears to be a kind of political backlash in Virginia? Why is this happening, I guess, is the simple question.
Republicans are exploiting a problem that the Democratic Party in particular and that liberals in general face right now. And the problem is that there's been a really important and, much awaited reconsideration by progressives and liberals about the history of race in our country. But liberals still don't have a clear narrative to replace the old narrative, according to which nothing was really so terrible and anyway we overcame it. Now that liberals acknowledge that there was slavery in the Constitution, that even after the end of slavery there was still segregation and Black people were still barred from voting, now that liberals acknowledge those things, they need a way of talking about race that reassures the general public that it remains possible still to make progress. And I think what Republicans are doing rather cleverly is exploiting a moment where liberals don't have a clear narrative to scare their base and to scare potential swing voters into thinking that the Democrats are saying something that they're not saying, namely that there's no hope for us in this country.
So, Randy, so how would you address that issue? It does seem that what the Republicans are trying to do is appeal to the person, the Greg Youngkin voter or the potential voter in Virginia who voted for Biden. So therefore, clearly didn't want Donald Trump and his racism, but feels that being told, white kids being told in classrooms that everybody in America is racist, that things haven't progressed much since 1965, that's wrong, that's producing a backlash. What do you say to those people?
I say that the best way to address this issue is to address it forthrightly and straightforwardly and embrace the complicated history and the complicated presence of America. On the one hand, that's right, slavery and segregation and racism and white supremacy is deeply entrenched in America. At the same time, there has been a tremendous alternative tradition, a tradition against slavery, a tradition against segregation, a tradition against racism. I mean, after all, in the past 25 years, the United States of America has seen an African-American president. As we speak, there is an African-American vice president. As we speak, there is an African-American who is in charge of the Department of Defense. So we have a complicated situation, and I think the best way of addressing our race question is to just be straightforward and be clear and embrace the tensions, the contradictions, the complexities of race in American life. I think we need actually a new vocabulary. So many of the terms we use these terms over and over, starting with racism, structural racism, critical race theory. These words actually have been weaponized. They are vehicles for propaganda. I think we would be better off if we were more concrete. We talked about real problems, and we actually used a language that got us away from these overused terms that actually don't mean that much.
No, one of the things that people, again, people like Trump have been able to weaponize is this idea of American history being irredeemably racist. Are we not allowed to honor people like Thomas Jefferson or even George Washington because they owned slaves and were, in a sense, actively pro-slavery? What is your answer? What is your narrative's answer to that problem?
Well, here I'm very influenced by another colleague of Randy's and mine, Professor Annette Gordon-Reed, who wrote the most important book written in many years about Jefferson. And her view broadly is that it's fine to acknowledge and honor those aspects of somebody like Jefferson that we do consider to be laudable. His commitment to democratic principles, to liberty, a whole range of good things, while simultaneously being honest and acknowledging that, yes, he held slaves. And yes, if you read his notes on Virginia, there's material in there that makes an argument for white supremacy, and it's a material argument that's a terrible one. But we have to be grown-ups and acknowledge that.
Randy, does all this leave you sad and disappointed that you can still weaponize race in such a powerful way?
Yes, it does. And in fact, for most of my life, I've been a very confident racial optimist. I have believed very confidently that we shall overcome. What has happened in the past few years and the ascendancy of Donald Trump was the worst aspect of this. What has happened in the past few years has been a emergence of an unapologetic and open appeal to racial resentments that has really taken me aback and has really chastened me. And so though I still am optimistic, my confidence has definitely been shaken.
Well, on that sobering note, we've got to end it. Thank you, gentlemen, for a fascinating conversation about an important topic.
Thank you.
Next.